A warning after a popular celebrity therapist loses her 16-year-old son to a drug overdose. CBS 2's Andrea Grymes spoke to child psychiatrist and author Dr. Jodi Gold for more information on things parents and caregivers need to look out for.
Your book is called Screen Smart Parenting. So what was your reaction when you saw this news that this teenager died of an overdose through somebody he met on Snapchat, according to his parents?
So obviously my heart goes out to the family and friends of Samuel. It's obviously a huge tragedy, and it's always a tragedy when anyone overdoses, especially a teenager, a 16-year-old. I think there's a whole bunch of things. I mean, obviously there's nothing we can do for him, but there's a whole bunch of things that we can talk about and think about in terms of trying to prevent this from happening to other teenagers. I think it's particularly difficult in the pandemic, to be honest. I think everybody, but particularly teenagers, everybody's in their room, everyone's doing school, everyone is just sort of holed up on social media, playing video games, and there's not a lot as parents that we can do about it. I would say that it's super important that you're opening the doors, that you're checking in on your kids, that you know what's going on with them in their bedrooms, because I feel like children and teenagers are living in their bedrooms at this moment. And I think that parents and clinicians and educators are feeling a little bit helpless, and maybe even at this moment, a little bit hopeless about how to support teenagers today. I've really noticed actually in the last month or 2 months that the whole pandemic and everything else has really taken a toll on teenagers. I sort of felt like earlier in the pandemic, the teenagers were doing better than some of the other ages. As long as you were healthy and as long as economically things were okay, the kids seemed to be very resilient. But I have noticed now that kids are getting more hopeless. They're spending more time in their room. They're more isolated. And that's something we should be talking about. Obviously, we should also be talking about the drugs. The drugs are, it goes without saying that we don't want our kids using drugs. We don't want them using illicit drugs, prescription drugs particularly. There's almost no reason to ever use them unless prescribed by a doctor. So I think trying to have those discussions with your kids is really important. You never want to use prescription drugs. You never want to use pain medicines. There's actually no reason to use them unless you're in pain and you're under the care of a doctor. So having those conversations with kids, I think, is critically important.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, no, absolutely. I just want to go back to the kids in their rooms, because she said in her post that her son was sheltering at home. And I know a lot of parents feel that their kids are in their room, they're on their phone, they don't even know. And sometimes it's really easy for them to hide, for kids to hide what they're doing on their phones. How do you break through that as a parent? How do you have an idea of what is going on a device, where it seems like a lot of times you can't or you don't?
It's always been incredibly difficult. It's even more difficult now. If a teenager wants to hide from you, they can. So there's not some secret magic to make sure that they don't hide. What you can do is be really honest with your kids on the front end. I have like sort of a no consequence kind of rule the first 1 or 2 times. I'd rather know what the kids are doing and not punish them if they're making mistakes, so that you keep the dialogue open. Because the minute that you close the dialogue, the minute that you're yelling and screaming at them, the minute you're taking their phone away, the minute that they're being punished, they go underground. And to be honest, there's nothing you can do once they go underground. So the key is to try to keep the dialogue open, to try to manage your judgment and your frustration, because we're all frustrated with what's going on in the world. And I'm personally frustrated that my kids spend too much time in their rooms, too much time on the games. So the goal is to keep the conversation open so that they can come to you without getting into trouble, so that you are empathetic. The other thing is trying to take a little bit of an interest in what your kids are doing, which can be really difficult depending on what games or what platforms they're on, but trying your best to walk into their room and ask them what they're playing and what they're doing. Also making sure that they're socially connected to people, like who are they connecting with? It's perfectly fine these days to have online friends. This is a whole new world. Even 2 years ago, I would have been concerned about some of the online connections that specifically teenagers were making. But in 2021, kids make friends online. They make friends playing video games. They make friends on social media platforms. It is just the way things are now. So talking to your kids about who they can trust, who their friends are. I mean, obviously you don't want a drug dealer on a social platform, but you don't want a drug dealer, period. To me, it's not so important that he was on Snapchat versus in the neighborhood. I think that the reality is we're all remote. So now I guess apparently even drug dealing is now remote and on social media. That I think the bigger issue though is what's going on with our kids. Are we taking care of them? I mean, obviously Samuel was a great kid, a good student. So you can't always know, they're not always warning signs, but there's more warning signs than you think. There's almost always warning signs when you go backwards, you know, hindsight.
That's what I was going to ask you next. What are things that parents should look out for, especially specifically teenagers?
So the deal is, when are they losing touch with real life friends? I mean, it's super difficult to stay connected to your friends at this moment. If you're in a community that's very remote and isolative, it's very hard. All you're going to do is stay connected digitally. So don't take the computer away. Don't take the phone away as much as you may want to. That is the only way for them to be connected. I want to make sure they're staying connected to their school friends, to their real life friends. They may also have online friends. Okay, that's fine. But I want to make sure that there actually is a connection to their real life friends. I want to make sure that they're sleeping and eating. You really do. I'm not even against setting an alarm at 2 o'clock in the morning and making sure that your kids are actually sleeping. Like I've done it myself, and I encourage parents to do it. If you're concerned that your kids are up all night, I think a lot of the dangerous stuff does happen in the middle of the night. People are disinhibited. There's less parental supervision. Everyone's tired. So I really don't want the kids on it after, depending on their age, but a 16-year-old by 1 o'clock, it should be turned off. I mean, it should be turned off much earlier. But if we're talking about the reality of the pandemic, if you're a parent out there and you know the reality, by 12 or 1 o'clock, the goal is to have it shut off.
That's what I was, yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So like even trying to get them to put their phone in another room after like 12 or 1 o'clock would be the way to go. The problem is if you're a parent at home and you're asleep, how do you know? So this is again where there's got to be trust and conversations, and you've got to get them out of their bedroom. Like I've taken to bribing kids. You can have candy if you'll just be in the kitchen. Just getting kids out of their bedroom, knowing what's going on with them. This child doesn't sound like he had a history of substance abuse. This just sounds like sort of something random he tried to do, which speaks to another point I want to talk about, boredom.
Yes.
Teenagers today are profoundly bored. And I put it in quotes because I think it has a new meaning. Teenagers have always had to find things to do and sometimes have gotten into trouble. Now they're all at home. Now everybody's doing everything digitally, especially if you're a teenager. And I think teenagers who are looking for excitement, that is part of being a teenager, right? You want the adrenaline, you want the excitement, you want to engage in risk-taking behaviors. There's so little to do when you're in your bedroom for the last 11 months. So what I hear the most is, I'm bored, I'm bored, I'm bored. If your kids are telling you that they're bored, they're bored, they're bored, dig deeper. What you and I think is boring might not exactly be what they mean. I've now sort of seen kids that are depressed, but they're not really saying they're depressed. They're saying, hey, I'm bored. And the parents are like, oh, go play a game, you know, oh, go have a snack. And actually what I think they're saying is that I'm feeling a little hopeless. Not always, of course, but they're feeling a little hopeless. It doesn't feel like there's an end in sight and there's nothing exciting to do. You know, I'm sort of not surprised that there's a little bit more like taking drugs the way this happened with Samuel, because I think kids are looking for excitement and there isn't a lot of excitement right now. And I'm not saying that we can create the excitement for them. I mean, people are super creative for sure, but maybe it's as simple as exploring why they're bored, why they're hopeless. I think that we don't want kids turning to drugs. We don't want them turning to drug dealers, certainly. So I think that means as parents, we've got to talk a lot more about boredom and isolation and friends and do what you can do. I realize there's no simple answer and we want people to be safe. And one of the other challenges is that the kids that are not bored, many of them are not being safe. So it's becoming really challenging for teenagers who are being safe. This is a big issue. One of my last big issues. One of my favorite things about the pandemic was that there was no FOMO, no fear of missing out, because nobody was doing anything. So it didn't matter if you weren't invited to the party, everybody was home. Now there's a new type of FOMO. And it's worse than it ever was. There's this idea that there are certain kids who are not following sort of the safety recommendations for any number of reasons. And then there are the kids that are. And the kids that are looking at the kids that are not on social media or in real life. And it's really challenging. And it's very hard for parents to have this conversation. We don't want them to be in groups together. We don't want them hooking up. We don't want them drinking together. It's all these things we don't want them to do. But some of the kids are doing it. So it makes it that much more challenging for the teenagers that are not doing it. It's very hard to remind them, oh, you're making good choices. Our family's making good choices. We promise you we're doing the right thing. That works fine if you're 30 or 40 or 50. It doesn't really work that well if you're 16.
So then what do you, so what do you do as a parent?
Well, I think one of the things you can do about that is sit down with them and talk about the pandemic and say, do you really think get them to think about who these people are that are breaking the rules. Is that the type of person or the type of family they want to be? Because some families are allowing certain things to happen that other families are not. And it's hard for all of us to sort of reconcile this, but it's particularly hard for teenagers to reconcile this. So I would sit down and talk about why your family is making the decisions they're making and kind of get the teenager's opinion. Do you think we're being too conservative? Do you think we're being unreasonable? Because once you engage a teenager, I think they might agree with you and say, it really sucks that this group is out drinking every night and I can't, but I kind of agree that I shouldn't be out with a group of kids drinking or partying. So I think if you can join with your kids, they're now, especially the teenagers, the older teenagers, I think if you can partner with them on why your family's making these decisions, on why they need to be out of their bedroom, on why they're feeling bored, just having the conversations is a first step. And of course, if you're really worried about them getting help right now, getting a psychologist or a therapist or somebody to talk to them can be helpful, but it might not be necessary. It may just be about having these real life conversations about how isolating it is right now and how boring it is right now.
Do you think parents of teenagers should be putting some kind of limits on screen time, on phones, on any of these devices, and on their social media use?
That's a great question. And I sort of wish that we could. So with older teenagers, I'm going to speak to older teenagers. I think this is a very family specific decision and it's a very age specific decision. What you're doing for a 9 and a 12 and a 16-year-old are 3 different plans completely. But if we're talking about older teenagers, the limits don't work very well. So in terms of parental controls, I wouldn't bother. Any smart 16-year-old can get around your parental controls with like 3 clicks or 2 clicks, to be fair. I think you can set some basic limits. For instance, I don't think you should sleep with your phone. I think trying to get them to put their phone somewhere else so they don't sleep with their phone, hopefully gets them off their phone for 8 or 9 hours. Trying to get them not to eat dinner or lunch with their phone or their computer it can also be very helpful. And then asking them to carve out time every day. And it could be as short as 15 minutes. It could be as long as 2 hours, but asking them to carve out a few minutes every day where they're offline and they're just present. It may be a tall order for a lot of kids these days, but just asking them to do it, I think is an important process. And I think understanding how they're using it, because to be clear, in 2021, every child and teenager uses their computer and their phone differently. And so your kids may be using it in absolutely fabulous and fantastic ways. They may be listening to talks and learning new skills and meeting new people around the world, and yay, go them. Or they may be in some addictive, violent video game that they're getting sucked into, or be on social media with people that are encouraging them, God forbid, to buy drugs or something. So it's not so much about how much time they're on their media, it's about what they're doing.
And as a parent, the only thing you can really, there's no 100% foolproof thing that you can do besides just keep an eye on them, be going in and out of their room and try to keep the dialogue open, I guess is the bottom line.
Absolutely. So with something like substance abuse and really problematic use, there are usually some more specific warning signs to look for. For instance, if your child's all of a sudden up at times that they were never up if they went to bed at midnight always, and now they're up at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, I would be suspicious. I would also be suspicious if your child or teenager is more secretive. If they usually let you walk in their room, I definitely don't believe that the room should be locked. I'd love the doors to be open. If the doors are not open, I do think that parents should always be able to just walk in. So when you walk in, if your kids are hiding what they're doing, it may be nothing, but you could be a little bit suspicious. If you walk in and they're playing video games and you see what they're playing, at least you know what's going on. I think we're really worried about a change in mood, a change in behavior, a change in sleep, a change in friends, and increased secrecy. Those are the things that are red flags that I think you have to be more assertive as a parent, at which point you need to figure out what's going on or get someone to help you figure out what's going on.
Thank you so much. I have a million more questions. I could talk to you for the next few hours. I'm definitely going to get your book, Screen Smart Parenting, because I think this is a lot of great information. So thank you so much. I know you probably have to run too, but thank you so much for your time, Dr. Gold. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.